If there is one thing I would love to change people's understanding of in genetics, it is the difference between an allele and a gene. So I was just driving and listening to a news report about a new potential Alzheimer's drug. And they said that this drug could be most helpful for people with 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene. And here's the thing, is that ApoE4 is not a gene, it's an allele. So as humans, with some very small exceptions, we all have the same set of genes. And we have 2 copies of every gene, one from each parent. But we have different versions of those genes. That's why we're not all identical. So in the story that I was just listening to, ApoE is the gene and ApoE4 is a version of that gene. So it is the ApoE4 allele. And I hear people say stuff like this all the time, right? They're talking about, I have the gene for breast cancer. My family has the gene for Alzheimer's, all those kinds of things. And if you're saying it in daily conversation, I don't care, right? Like, we all know what you're talking about. But I think it's important to understand that we all have those genes. We all have BRCA genes. Some of us just have versions of the BRCA genes that put us at a greater or a lower risk for getting breast cancer. And we have this versioning of almost every single gene in our body. And I think understanding that, emphasizes how similar we all are, right? Like, we all have these same genes. We just have slightly different versions of them. And I think it also highlights the fact that when people are thinking about, and I'm using BRCA because I think it's one of the gene names that people know quite well. When people think about saying, I have the BRCA gene, there are many different versions of the BRCA gene. There are some versions or alleles that are more common than others. But you can imagine that if a gene is a string of letters, you could have changes at almost any one of those letters. And some of them are much more common changes. Others are very rare changes. Some of them are brand new changes we've never seen before. But we all have those same genes. Again, I don't know why I think this is so important. I think it just helps with understanding the complexity of genetics. But also in some ways it's beautiful simplicity, right? Like this set of genes that makes us human, we all have those. I've heard people talk about when you're trying to be a communicator, you should have like 3 messages that you talk about over and over and over again. And I'm so bad about that, right? Like one day I'm talking about blimps, the next day I'm talking about fluorescence, the next day I'm talking about genes. Like I don't have that. But I do think I should make the difference between genes and alleles one of mine that I think of more often, because it is something that I wished more people understood. And when I communicate about alleles, I don't anticipate everyone's going to know that word. So often you'll hear me talk about different versions of a gene. That's typically what I say when I'm doing public communication, because again, I don't anticipate that everyone's going to know the word allele, but I do think it's important to get across that context that we're talking about versions of a gene. And I don't care what you say in conversation, but I do kind of care what the science report on the radio says. I think that's a place where we should be saying people who have 2 versions of this ApoE gene. And I think if we do that more in public communication, we can get more people to understand this. These are my driving on a work trip thoughts. I'm gonna go eat dinner.